Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So yesterday we talked about money and banking and cryptocurrency, digital currency. So a necessary correlation of that is the bank card or the credit card. So today's lecture is going to be dedicated to that. I realize if you are an English speaking person, which these courses and the whole program is meant for, this might be a little pedestrian. This might be a little too simplified, and that's okay. But sometimes it's one of the things that we got to go through together because it's something that is a modern transaction. Now, the interesting thing about the credit card / debit card is that there are things like that in the past where we talked about promissory notes, when we talked about like the shipping example and bartering and things like that, because sometimes it's just impossible to carry all of that money. So if you were a merchant in, I don't know, mid, 9th, 10th century Baghdad or Cairo or something like that, and you were going to buy a lot of textiles or something like that, you can't drag with you all of this money. So in the actual dealing of the actual financial dealings, there would have been some kind of wakala. There would have been some kind of, we're going to deputize somebody, maybe a third party or somebody on my behalf or on your behalf or an independent agent that would sort of handle the actual physical transaction while we come to an agreement, simply because it's impossible to carry all that kind of weight all the time. So what we're going to talk about actually does have things similar in the classical Islamic law. And also in the ancient world, there was this idea of a third party. I mean, that's how the whole banking system arose when we talked about shipping things and promissory notes and the like. So the basic concept of the bank card or the credit card is not going to be something that is weird for us, but there are some details in that, like some of the interest that is involved in the loans and paying the minimum amount, those type of things, that can cause some types of problems. So I'm going to go through the different types of cards. That part is a little, I think, pedestrian. I mean, I found it pedestrian when I was preparing for it, to be honest, but hopefully we kind of refresh our memories and we lay the groundwork for the bigger discussion about the permissibility or lack thereof of some of the card transactions. So that's some of what we're going to talk about. We'll begin in the next clip, inshallah. All right, so the first thing for us to just agree to is that this is a new type of transaction, hence why it's in this course, and it is really a function of a few things. It's a function of the rise of banking, and it is a function of, well, before the rise of banking, it's a function, actually, I would argue it's a function of it's necessarily a function of trade and commerce, because as I said in the introductory clip, you can't really carry thousands of pounds or kilograms of goods and or gold and silver. It's not feasible, it's not practical. If you have animals that are pulling the wagons and things like that, it's susceptible to damage, it's susceptible to being robbed. So it's just not a secure way of doing transactions. So even in the ancient world, there was a form of this in which there has to be some kind of way for us to exchange large amounts of payments, and there would be some type of financial instrument to carry that. So that's the first thing. So this is not something that's new to humankind. Number two is that the bank card / credit card is a function of modern banking. Once you have the bank and everything is digital and centralized, and it's just ones and zeros on a screen, then, well, how do you access your money that's in your account? Do you have to go to the bank every time you want money and withdraw money? I mean, when I was growing up and I was taught how to do banking, that's what I had to do. I was just a teenager, so I didn't have access to a credit card or something like that. So I'd have to go to the bank, stand in line, withdraw money. I mean, that's really, really, I might as well just keep it in a drawer at home, right? It's very, very impractical. And I didn't have that much money, just sort of working summer jobs, odd jobs. But so it really becomes, like the bank is a necessary thing, these cards are now a necessary thing because the card is your bank. In other words, yeah, you have a bank account somewhere and you have a statement or an online statement, but really it's the card that's in your wallet, that's what you're using. Or it might even be the card that's now the digital card that's on your phone, that's what you're going to be. And by the way, my phone is here because that's where I have the timer for the class. I'm not using my phone. I put on airplane mode every time I record. That's the timer that I use. So sometimes it's just, that's when you think of your money and you're buying something, it's that. It's the card that you're using to buy the thing. So that's why we need to talk about it, because it's a very personal thing. Really, in the 1950s and 60s in the United States, this is kind of what took off. So bank cards took off, credit cards took off, insurance took off. All of these kind of things are parallel tracks. And if you've noticed, it's something that we've really been consuming. Almost half of the entire course is just dealing with these type of transactions. It really started off, or one of the early manifestations of that was the, things like the Diners Club, American Express, traveler's checks. So it was a way for travelers to be able to travel some type of secure financial instrument without having to carry like a bag of money. I mean, it's not. So if you're traveling somewhere, I remember when I was very young and you'd go to Europe, before the concept of the EU, each country had its own currency. I mean, I didn't travel through Europe, but we would travel on the way to the Middle East. So sometimes you would spend time in the airport or in a local city or something like that if there's a long layover. There was the Swiss franc and the German mark, and I mean, there was just the English pound. I mean, every country had its own little thing. So the traveler's checks was a way to be able to carry money that's secure and to be able to redeem it with your ID, so it's secure. So if you lose it, you kind of reimburse, etc. So that became important. And at the time, that was really, really important for people that traveled, because that was really the only practical way to do it. So again, it's like a promissory note. It's something that you've bought already that you're going to redeem somewhere else, so you don't have to carry. All of that's fine. We have no problem with that. No one really uses that anymore. So let's just stay to the debit card and the pure credit card. Now, the debit card that's in our pocket is really two things. It's a credit card, or it's a direct debit card. And sometimes when you pay with a debit card, which from a financial point of view is something that people don't recommend because it's not secure, but let's just go with it for a minute. Oftentimes the merchant will ask you credit or debit. Credit means that the bank is paying the merchant and then going to come to you to take the money. So they're your wakil. You've deputized them to pay the merchant. So you're at the grocery store, you're buying something for $10. The bank, the generic bank is paying the merchant, the grocery store, and then it will come to you and say, give me the money from your account. The debit is a direct debit card where the money is taken from your account right away and placed into the merchant. From your point of view as the user, we oftentimes don't think about those differences. However, the difference is, number one, is it's actually a different transaction, as I just mentioned. And number two, it affects what we call your credit score, which is something that becomes very important in the modern world, because the credit score is what the bank will use to determine your limits, your spending limits, your credit limits, any financing that you're seeking for a project or a home or a car. All of that's going to be linked to your ability to pay back and to, etc. So when you do it with credit, it positively can impact your credit score if you pay on time, which we'll get to shortly, and it can impact negatively if you don't do it. But when it's just taken out of your account, you haven't really used the credit system. So the whole modern banking system is based on credit. It's not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not our thing, let's say. I mean, if we were to do it and construct an entire system, we probably would have some slight alterations, but that's for another day, another time. Okay, so when we're talking about the cards in our pocket, whether it's like a Visa or MasterCard, Discovery, now Apple has its own card, whatever the case may be, and it's issued to your bank, it is going to be given to you with a credit limit, with a limit that you can spend. Whether you use it as a debit card or whether you use it as a credit card, there'll be some type of limit, and that limit is directly linked to what I just said is your credit score, which the bank and every country or region has its own terminal. Credit score is an American thing, that's what I'm familiar with, but in all other countries it's just called something else, but it's the same concept, where there is a mathematical way that the bank determines how much you make and how much you spend, and therefore how much can they lend you from the wakala point of view if you're buying something on credit, and then they give you 30 days to be able to pay back that money. So then there is the pure credit card, which is you have a Visa card, like just a pure credit card with a credit company, And every transaction is a wakala transaction. Every transaction is Visa. I'm going to the bookstore to buy some books. I spend $100 on books. I charge it to my card. Then that means Visa, the Visa company, has paid the merchant already the $100. It's gone into their account. And at the end of the month, I get a bill saying you owe us $100 because we paid on your behalf $100. So either I wire them the money, or it's a digital transfer, or in the old days we used to actually write a check, to the Visa company for the entire statement balance. That's textbook wakala, But in the credit card company, there's a couple of other things that are happening. Number one is that the credit card company actually doesn't want you to do that, what I just said. What they want you to do is they want you to buy more than you can afford, give you a statement of like $3,000 at the end of the month, and then you only pay the minimal amount, which is like $150. So it's very seductive because, I don't have to pay $150. And then they will charge you interest in the future payments. That is highly problematic and highly, if we can say the term, highly haram, because of the debt. You end up getting yourself into a cycle of debt, and that debt is not backed by an asset. And then the other thing that becomes an issue is that the credit card company wants to oftentimes charge you fees, whether they be late fees, whether they be penalties, whether they be service fees. Another thing is that the credit card company allows you to withdraw money, cash. So let's say I'm traveling and I got stuck somewhere, I have no cash, but I have my credit card. I should be able to take that credit card to the ATM machine and withdraw money. The same thing, it will charge me for that, but they will charge me a fee for that, a processing fee, they call it, or something like that. And then there's the whole issue of points. Now that we have these points, that every time you spend money, you get a point, and then at the end of the year or whenever you want, you can redeem your points for this or for that. So these are all different types of things that are happening with a pure credit card, which is different than the bank card, which, if we just call it bank card, the bank card allows for the credit option, but is also a debit option. In the credit option of the bank card, it also allows the things that we just described, but in a limited fashion. They do have some reward points sometimes. Sometimes there's a service fee, but the idea of paying the minimal amount is much more restricted because it's directly tied to your bank account than it is with the credit card. The credit card will give you a credit card with a certain amount of spending limit based on its study of your credit portfolio, your credit score, but they really are even openly don't want you to pay the whole thing back because then they're not making money. But the debit card or the bank card is a little bit more direct. So we've laid out the terms. So in the next clip, let's talk a little bit about the fiqh behind those transactions. All right. So let's look at the debit card. If I'm using my debit card as a debit card, as a pure debit card, I go to the grocery store, I go to the bookstore, I buy something, and it's just taken out from my account. That's a straight up bay'ah, right? Because the money is taken directly from my account at that moment. So I have the money in my account. So I'm only using the money that I have. I'm buying something that's halal. There's ijab, there's qubul. There's the majlis of the al-aqd, which is, at the cash register or the checkout aisle or whatever. And I get a receipt and khalas, it's done. That's a done deal. So there's zero issues with that whatsoever. It's a straight up pure halal transaction without any issue whatsoever. Now, if you use your debit card as a credit card, it's going to be almost the same thing because, in my experience at least, most of the debit cards that are using it as a credit card take the money from your account right away anyway. It's just that there's that extra step behind the scenes that positively impacts your credit score. But in that point, unless there's a new type of bank card that has a credit option that's different, let's park that for a side. That's also simple, straight up bay'ah. There's ijab and there's qubul. There's the majlis of the contract of the aqd. There's the exchange of money and exchange of goods in the majlis. You get a receipt, the money is taken and deducted from your account, and you're good to go. So both those transactions don't pose any problems from the Sharia point of view. You can also take your debit card to the ATM machine and you can withdraw money from your account. Well, it's your money. So rather than standing in line at the teller and them withdrawing your money, which, by the way, at the teller, they're doing the exact same thing that you would be doing at the ATM machine, by the way. It's not like there's a drawer with your money in it. All of our money is actually not in the bank. It's being invested elsewhere. And there's a ratio that each nation's central bank or governing financial institution allows, a ratio of actual cash that has to be available at the banks versus cash, the money that's being invested, by the way. Anyway, so you're withdrawing money from your account. Well, it's your account. Khalas, you take the money, it's not a problem. Now let's say I take my bank card and I go to another bank ATM. Not my bank ATM because I can't find one. It withdraws money from my account and then it takes a fee on that. Is that extra fee haram? Well, the fiqh councils say it's not haram because that's the fee that's the work that the bank has to do to go from their bank to your bank to get the money to bring it to its bank, etc. So that type of processing fee is permissible for you to pay, and indeed you have to pay it if you have to withdraw the money, because there's no other way that the bank can get the money. So in that case, that's another type of transaction that the debit card can be used for. Related to that are checks. So I didn't talk about checks in the introductory remark in the last class, but I think that checks are a dying breed. I still use checks in the United States because I grew up using them, and you go with what you're used to. But the check is the same thing. It's a promissory note, and when you write a check, that money has to be in your account, and when the other person goes to cash or deposit their check, that money is going to be taken out of your account, because on the check are the numbers of your account and the routing numbers and this and that, and therefore the money is taken directly out of you. So the check becomes your promise to pay that person, if the money is not in my accounts, depending on how some banks are, either the check will bounce, in which I pay a fee and I'm embarrassed because the person couldn't pay, or the money is given to the person and the fees are put onto me, because there's a deficiency of funds and I have to replenish the funds. So the check is a more direct way than the debit card, but it's a more antiquated way because I think many of you probably don't even use checks anymore. And in the Muslim world, checks are still used, but more commonly. But because of the rise of digital currency, credit cards, online payments, and things like that, there's a rapid rise in the last, I would say, 5 years on credit cards in the Muslim world, especially in the Arab world. So I think that very soon checks in the Muslim/Arab world will also be a relic of the past. Okay, now let's look at the credit card. Credit card here, meaning a credit card issued by a credit card issued like a Visa or a MasterCard or Discovery or an American Express, or I don't know, whatever bank, whatever credit cards are out there. Those are the big ones that are known. The credit card asks you to apply. So you have to apply for the card. And when you apply for the card, they ask you for basic information like a national ID. In America, it's called the Social Security number. And they use that number to do a financial research on you to see what is your spending pattern, what is your income pattern, how much can you handle, and then therefore they either approve or reject your application. So a lot of young people have problems getting cards because they don't have a credit history, or a lot of immigrants have problems in different countries because they have no financial history. That becomes an issue. And if you are approved, they will approve you at different levels. So they will say, okay, we'll approve you, but you only have a $500 spending limit. So credit cards that are geared for high school/college students will oftentimes be like that, where the credit limit is very low number, because they know you're a student and you're probably being supported by your parents or you're working odd jobs, so we'll give you a little bit amount so you don't destroy yourself with the debt. Or if you're working and you're mid-age and you apply for a credit card, you have a larger credit limit, spending limit, and the spending limit might be way beyond your ability. So also that kind of indicates to you that the credit card company wants you to overspend, as I said in the previous clip, and that becomes very problematic, in the Sharia. So the credit card company approves your application, issues you the card, and then so now you are in like a contract with the credit card company. Okay, so there is an agreement between you and them that they are allowing you to spend using this card, and then they will pay those merchants and pay those debts on your behalf, and then they will come back to you at the end of the month and give you a statement and give you 30 days, 40 days, whatever the case may be, to pay the card. If you don't pay the card in full, it will tell you there's a minimal payment. The minimal payment will be such a small fraction that it's a seductive way of, oh, I only pay the minimum, I can just keep buying everything I want and overspending, and then they will keep charging you every month the delta that you didn't pay plus interest. So you'll end up having to pay 5, 8, 15, 20, 30 times more than what you bought. That is haram, because that's debt, al-ighraqu fil madjuniya. That's to become drowning in debt that one cannot pay or one cannot handle. So that is something that cannot be done. So even though they want you to do that, you have to be careful. So basically what you want to end up doing is buying only what you can pay. So whatever the credit card statement is, every month you got to pay it in full, and that way you're only spending what you can. Now, you can ask, well, why don't I just buy everything cash? It's just not feasible. It doesn't work. You can try, and I guarantee you'll only be able to last a couple of months doing that. It just doesn't work, because it becomes so much more of a burden. And that's what the last couple of lectures, one of the things I was trying to impress upon you is a lot of the things that we're talking about are just standard. This is the way the world is now. It's like saying I'm going to live but without using electricity, or I'm going to live without having the internet. It's impossible. You can't. You won't last that long, especially the internet. Everything is online. For me to be able to record these, I need the internet to upload them. For you to watch them, you need the internet to download them. I need technology. I have a light behind me. I have a light above me. I have the camera. I have an iPad here with a note. I mean, it's impossible. So same thing with the credit. It's impossible to live your life without being part of the financial system, banks, cards, credit, debt, all of that. I'm not necessarily saying, by the way, that that's always, all of it is good. I mean, there are some things that are haram that we're pointing out. But my point is that it's impossible not to have this type of system. So rather than be like, oh, a'udhu billah, the credit cards are haram, say, it's not haram. One type of transaction with the credit card is haram. So don't do that. Just now that you know, you have the knowledge, use the credit card the right way so that you don't have a problem. And then I guess one can add with the credit card is that you can withdraw money with it, but then that oftentimes has a huge, I'm not as familiar with that, but that can have a huge interest-bearing effect on the repayment of that. So that's something that therefore you would want to avoid because we'll just charge the card rather than withdraw the cash. Okay, so these are some of the thoughts related to the debit card, the credit card, and then in the next clip we'll wrap up this discussion, inshallah. Okay, there's not that much more for me that I want to say, but we have to fill up the time. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to, what's the right word? Diminish the importance of the topic. I'm just saying it's pretty straightforward. Is what I'm trying to say. If we step back for a second and we look at the al-fiqh al-mawruth, the inherited fiqh. If you drop the word credit card, debit card, bank, and all of that, and you just think about the transactions that we talked about, we have these types of transactions. They're just called like al-wakala, al-hawala, al-kafala, a qard, buying something bil ajal, buying something in the future, etc. But they just have conditions. So the credit card is a wakala transaction. At its core, that's what it is. You are deputizing another person to buy on your house. So if I bring you and I say I'm going to give you $1,000, I want you to go to the market this week and buy books for me. I need Shafi'i books of furu and usul. I have deputized you to do that. Now you have to go now and carry out the actual work. That's exactly what the credit card is doing. You have given the credit card permission to transact on your behalf. So when I charge the card and I sign the bill, I have given them permission to pay. I've authorized that payment, and they're going to come back and they're going to say, okay, where's the money? Because there was no money up front. We paid it for you. You have to pay us back. It's the same thing. So the default ruling, the default hukum of all of the things that we said is it's al-ibaha. It's all permissible because there's nothing at its core that's haram. There's nothing at the core of those transactions that cause us to be concerned. Just like there's nothing in the core of money not being backed by gold and silver that makes it haram. It doesn't mean that you can't make a haram transaction. You can always make a haram transaction. But the point is that there's nothing wrong with it. But we have to understand what the issue is at first. There are, I guess, some people that will, I've seen some people, oh, credit cards are haram. Or I'm asked all the time, are credit cards haram? Which is a really poor question because, I mean, what about the credit? The credit card can do multiple things. The credit card offers you consumer protection, by the way. You know, a lot of the credit cards, one of the reasons you buy with a credit card and not with a debit card is consumer protection. I remember during COVID, for example, I had purchased a plane ticket. I don't know why I did this, but at that time, one of the plane tickets I bought, it was like a family situation. I used the debit card. Okay, well, COVID came and there was all these lockdowns, and I need my money back because obviously I can't fly. The flights are grounded. Because it was a debit card transaction, it took forever. It took like almost a year for the money to come back. Whereas I had friends in very similar situations that had bought those tickets using a credit card, and before the next statement, the money came back. So the credit card provides consumer protection. Who is going to say that consumer protection is haram? I mean, nobody. It's something that's important. We have to have consumer protection. The Sharia instructs us to not sell the unknown things. The wet fruit has to be put on the top, like the Prophet ﷺ said, not on the bottom, so that people can see what they're buying. There can be no gharar, no speculative purchasing. You can't buy like something that's impossible, like I'm going to sell you the birds in the sky, we said, because how are you going to get that, etc., etc. So there's nothing wrong with these transactions at their core, but it doesn't mean that all of the transactions that can happen are halal. So the wakala discussion is going to be, and I think maybe, I can't remember exactly, but I think when I did the recordings for that, I even think I might have said as much. So, there are a couple of ground rules when it comes to the credit cards. Number one is that we're not going to buy more than we can spend. And that's just a general rule of thumb. It's a good secular advice, it's a good religious advice, it helps you in your dunya and your akhirah. So I know that every month I can only spend $500. Khalas, I'm only going to use the credit card up to $500. Even though the credit card wants me to use more, and the credit card company wants me to go further, and don't worry, and that we're going to have the self-discipline and be like, no, I'm only going to spend that much, so I'm going to be more vigilant in my spending. So I'm going to watch the app, or I'm going to make sure that I get the notifications, keep a little tally, keep a little notebook, whatever the case may be. I'm only going to spend what I can pay back in full. And then the second thing is the minute I get the bill, I'm going to pay back as soon as is humanly possible to avoid the late fees and the interest payments and things like that. A lot of the modern credit card companies, as I said, they have fees, service fees, yearly fees, and that's because the companies do the thing for you, and it's like you're paying your wakil something to do something for you, extra, like he bought a meal or something like that. So it's like sort of the same thing. There's no issue with that. Now, if you buy something or you pay for a service, like the airplane example that I made, sometimes there are disputes between you and the merchant. So I'll go to the merchant and, like I'm in the old souk, like in Khan and Khalil in Egypt, or like the old souk of Marrakesh or something like that. There's all these buildings and internet connection's not that good. The guy keeps putting the card in the machine. Okay, declined, and finally it went through. But then I go home and I find out that I was charged 3 times. So it happens all the time. This happens all the time now. Okay, so this is where the consumer protection comes in. If this was the debit card situation and it deducted the money 3 times, it's going to be harder for me to dispute. I have to go back to the merchant and say, can you please refund me? And they might refuse. Who are you? I don't remember you, or the store is closed. But with the credit card company, sometimes even from the app, you can be like, okay, this is a double payment. And the credit card company will see you. You bought something for, $34.50 or £34.50 once, twice, 3 times in a row from the same merchant in the span of minutes. Okay, obviously that was a mistake. You don't buy like that. You just buy everything all at once. So the consumer protection is also important, and you have to understand that the fees that you pay the credit card companies, because we're not going to pay the minimal payment and then pay the interest, and so they're not going to make money off of us that way. But the fee is what pays the credit card company to do those things for you. Who's going to fight and advocate on your behalf to get your money back? So that's also something that's permissible, that's going to happen. We're not going to pay the minimum amount, as I said, and then just get ourselves into debt, because that's haram. But then sometimes the credit card company, almost I think all credit card companies now offer you the points, and the modern fiqh position say, well, these points are like a gift, like a hiba. So, we're going to gift you 100,000 points, which sounds like a lot, but it ends up being a little bit of money. And you can redeem them for travel, and we'll discount the next travel for you. And so that's also part of the, and there are people that are obsessed with points, and they try to game the points, and they try to do this and that. And I know people that they'll pay everything with their credit card company so that they can amass an amazing amount of points, and then will use those points for a family vacation every few years and stuff like that. Anyway, so that's considered a gift. So the bottom line is that when we have a modern transaction, what we try to do is we try to go back prima facie. What does this look like in the Turath? And is it a gift? Is it a wakah? We have those categories. In addition, you have to understand what this modern thing is. So that's very, very key. You have to know what is actually happening with the transaction, which means you're not going to look at the books of fiqh. You got to look at the terms of the credit card company. You have to understand financial terms. You have to kind of understand what are the different options. You have to be worldly in that matter to be able to put the two together. When you find a modern opinion that is off-putting or very limiting, either one of two things are happening. Either you just don't want to comply with the halal and the haram, or the person that's issuing the opinion has a very narrow and limited view of what the it is, the takif. And that's a critical component. I find that the latter is oftentimes the case. When people say weird things, it's oftentimes because their understanding of it is just very limited. So I've done my best, and I said in the outset of this lecture that this is pretty pedestrian in the sense that, I think we all use credit cards and understand how they work. But just in case, it's important that we remind ourselves this is what the nature of the transaction is, and this is what's happening, so that we are all on the same page. So the takif, how you conceptualize the issue, is very, very, very critical before you start to consider what the ruling of the thing may be. Many times I mentioned standing in the teller in the bank and getting your money and saying it's the same as what you were doing at the ATM machine. A lot of people don't realize that your money is actually not in the bank. Physically, it's not in the bank. It's a portion. If all of us made a run for the bank, the economic system would collapse, because all of our money is actually not in the bank, because the bank is using that money, leveraging it to fund massive projects that's making the bank money. That's how the bank works. You have to understand that concept has to be clear in your mind. That's a very basic thing. It's even more sophisticated than that, because there's a ratio of how much the bank of its clients' money can it keep cash versus how much can it invest and leverage. And oftentimes they'll take a loan on that to increase it. It's also a whole sort of sophisticated thing, but I'm giving you just a simple thing. So the takif, the conceptualization, has to be sharp. Anyway, those are the main things I wanted to talk about. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, in today's class we talked about credit cards, debit cards, bank cards, which is a necessary discussion after we discuss the issue of banking and the nature of modern money, fiat currency, digital currency, and whatnot. So we all have some kind of bank card or debit card or credit card. But it's important, one, for us to know how the cards work. So the debit card is taking money directly out of your card, or the debit card is creating a credit transaction, which is still taking the money out of your account, but adding an extra step, which adds to your credit portfolio and your credit score. And then the credit card is a straight up wakala, where the credit card company like Visa, MasterCard, Discovery Card, American Express, etc., you are deputizing them to buy things on your behalf, and then they come back to you with the bill, and then you pay the bill. It's a straight up textbook wakala transaction. Now, unfortunately, the credit card company doesn't want you to pay the bill in full. It wants you to pay the minimal amount so it can charge you more in interest and make more money off of you. Now that's haram, textbook haram. So while we can use credit cards, and indeed we must and we will use it because there's a lot of consumer protection involved, we also have to be mindful of how we use the credit cards and make sure that we don't overspend. So the basic rule of thumb is that a Muslim is only going to buy what they can afford, and if they can't afford something, they'll be patient until something changes. They'll downgrade their life if they have to, eat less, dress less, do less, because لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah Ta'ala only bears a soul with what it can handle, so we don't want to create more debt for ourselves. We talked a little bit about checks, but it's a dying breed. So, I mean, in the notes there was some stuff about checks, but I didn't spend too much time on it because, I mean, who amongst you, I mean, I still use checks as I mentioned, but even less and less as the years go on. I mean, my children don't even know how to write a check. If I asked them to write a check on my behalf, they wouldn't know how to do it. It's a dying thing. And we did talk a little bit about points. So the points is like a gift from the credit card company. We talked a little bit about the service, different types of service fees that involved, and that's sort of the fees that you're paying for the company to be able to carry out its tasks and protection on your behalf. So those are the main points that we talked about. I think this is maybe more of a straightforward conversation. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.